Hello, friends. Welcome to the Logistics of Logistics podcast. My name is Joe Lynch. Thank you so much for joining us today. On the Logistics of Logistics, I talk to experts in logistics and transportation, warehousing, fulfillment, supply chain, and of course, technology. And during these interviews, I'm always the one asking the dumb questions. I ask the dumb questions so you don't have to. Today's topic is 4 trends in freight brokerage with my friend Kevin Hill. Kevin is the owner of Brush Pass Research, a sales and marketing research firm that helps companies sell to freight brokerages across North America. The freight brokerage space has grown in importance and sophistication over the last decade, capturing an even larger percentage of total shipments. The industry is continuing to evolve, and nobody tracks those industry changes better than my friend Kevin Hill. If you are interested in the freight brokerage business, please listen to my convo with Kevin Hill. How's it going, Kevin?
Going great, Joe. Thanks for having me on. It's always a pleasure coming on the Logistics of Logistics. It was the first podcast I ever did, so it's always a great memory coming back and talking to you.
Yep. It was your first time on a podcast, and it was my second. You were my second guest. My first was Steve Elwell, and he was forced. Anyway, Kev, please introduce yourself and your company, where you're calling from today.
Yeah, my name is Kevin Hill, calling in from Fort Worth, Texas, and my company is Brush Pass Research. And quickly, what we do is we provide a lot of research on the freight brokerage industry, and we sell intel on freight brokerages and contact information to mostly freight tech companies who are looking to market into that vertical.
Yep. Earlier today, we were talking, and I said, I think you're the only person, and certainly first I know of, who does industry research on the freight brokerage market.
Yes, I think I am too, because I've never been able to find it myself. And when I was working at FreightWaves, we were always looking for it and trying to find better information about the freight brokerage market. And before that, I was running carrier lists and I was selling into the freight brokerage market and I couldn't find it. And I created my own internal database of contacts and everything back 5, 6, 7 years ago, and decided to recreate that and collect information on the industry, which then I am able to publish out there for free to give people to answer those lingering questions that we all had on how big the market is, how it's segmented, and everything you need to know to go out and sell to the market.
Yeah. And by the way, not so long ago, I'll say 10 years ago, 10 years ago, no one cared that there was a freight brokerage market because no one was really selling into it. There were specialty companies, there were transportation management systems, but now there are so many freight tech companies that want to sell to that market. And I said many times on my podcast, I don't know how many freight brokerages are. So people said to me, there's 17,000. I believed them. Then they said 27,000. I believe that too. Until you came around, there was nobody who could give you a number that was close.
You're exactly right. 10, 12 years ago, there's only, you had TMS companies and you had load boards and
Forgot them.
MacroPoint was coming out. So you had visibility, but just that one visibility tool. And that was about it. So no one really cared. It was a dirty word, broker, right? You'd find a lot of people making cold calls saying, trying to do word salad to get around saying, oh yeah, I'm a broker. But now it's a great thing to be. It's a great thing to be a 3PL, a brokerage. Everyone's trying to do that, asset light or no assets. Even the large asset players now have large brokerages in-house. It's a different beast out there, and
more legitimate for sure. And I will say I worked at a third-party logistics company. We did mostly less than truckload. And when I would make phone calls occasionally, I'd say, hey, I want to help you with your transportation, whatever my stupid spiel was of the day. And they would say, do you have trucks? I'd say, no, but click. They would hang up just like that.
Yeah, it would say, we're a transportation provider. And they'd say, what does that mean? And then you dance around it a little bit sometimes, but it just didn't have the feel that it does now. Back to your numbers were pretty good, right? Pre-pandemic, you're looking at, I can't remember off the top of my head, but close to 17,000 brokerages. And that exploded to over 30,000 in 18 months. Within 18 months, it exploded 30,000. And it gives you the idea of the market in 2020, late 2020 and into 2021. It was just a rocket ship.
Yep. So before we get into the 4 trends that we want to talk about, I want to talk about who you serve. Who are your customers again?
Yeah, they're mostly freight tech companies, really anybody selling into the freight brokerage industry. And most of that is domestic truckload, LTL brokerages that are out there. There's just under 27,000 active freight brokerages right now. About 3,000 of those have more than 5 employees, let's say. They're doing more than $5 million in gross revenue, and they have the size and scale to really afford and utilize freight tech products. They have the number of seats, they have the budget, and that they have the technical infrastructure, let's say, to be able to purchase goods.
So what are you selling to them? What does your research entail?
It entails there's that sales leads, contact information on the top 1,500 or the largest 1,500 brokers right now. So you have that director level and above, email, phone number, contacts, as well as what TMS they're running, what pricing tools they use, a little bit of intel on their freight stack, their size, and also a little bit more information to come on the financial side too. So look for that in the coming weeks and months as I roll that out.
Yep. And I've made some introductions to you in the past. And when I tell people what you're doing, if they're selling freight tech, they go, "Oh yeah, definitely want to talk to that guy." Sometimes when you say, "Hey, do you want to meet my buddy Jim?" They're like, "Nah, I don't know." And no one says no to that. And again, I don't think this information was readily available until you pulled it together in the last few years. And again, the name of your company is Brush Pass Research. And you sell like a subscription?
Yeah, subscription is annual license. I'm always adding new leads, new intel, taking off bad leads in the database, and you can download that, put it into your CRM, whatever. And it's a need that I had back in 2017, 2018 with carrier lists, and I knew how to broker loads. I knew what I needed as a tool, so I built that, but I didn't really know the wider industry. So I didn't know who to contact. That was always a struggle. But I found a couple methods to go in and scrape some information and put together this huge list of freight brokerages. And we just cold emailed all the time back in the day. There's smarter ways to do that now. And I know more about the market through carrier lists and freight waves and other ventures that I've done to be able to identify those larger brokerages, those mid cap. I have large cap, mid cap, and growth cap, and that covers 10 seats and above. And it's a very wide market, right? 27,000. How do you pick out that 1,000 or that 1,500? I've been able to do that, and that's what you need as a freight tech company. It pours gasoline on your sales fire.
I like it. I like it. So a lot of people will know you from your first podcast, which was Put That Coffee Down over at Freight Waves. I know you did a ton of episodes. I was on it once. And now you have a new podcast. What is the podcast you're doing now?
Yeah, I have 2, right? I have one with my old Put That Coffee Down co-host, Richie Daigle. It's called The Last Sell. And we publish that maybe once or twice a month. And it covers kind of your experience in sales. And we'll have you on there, Joe, very soon.
I would love
to
it.
come on and talk about sales strategy and your history of sales, right? Your best sell, your worst sell, your easiest sell, your hardest sell, your most stressful. So we've had Kevin Nolan on there. We've had some people outside the industry that have large followings.
Well, you just had Ryan on the other day, right?
Yeah. Had Ryan Sullivan on there. And then I do a Thursday morning live LinkedIn show with Casey Larkin called Dude, What's the Bid? And we just jump on there. He works at Freight Lanes now. We used to work at Freight Waves together. And we'll just talk about the market, talk about whatever. We'll have guests on there. We're talking about a show we did 2 or 3 weeks ago with Ed Burns over at Burns Logistics.
Yep. We'll talk about him some more.
Yeah. And so we just have fun with that. So we just jump on there. I like live shows anyway.
No, that's a good idea. That's a good idea. And I'll make sure we put a link to both of your podcasts in the show notes so people can take a listen. So before we hit record, we were prepping and mostly blabbing. I told you I was going to fire my sales guy And then I realized it would be difficult to fire him as he is me. But anyway, we came up with 4 trends we wanted to talk about. So the first trend is just what's going on in this market, and also related to that, market volatility. Please elaborate.
Yeah, so if you meet somebody who knows when the market's going to turn, it's not me whatsoever, and I take it with a grain of salt. I remember when Craig made the call back in February, March of 2022. Not many people believed it. A lot of people thought fourth quarter 2022, then the first half of 2023, then the back half of 2023.
We've been disappointed.
Yeah. It keeps on getting, you look at earnings calls and watch the earning calls, and everything gets pushed back. And now it is maybe right now, maybe it's the first half of 2025. So we'll wait and see on that. It's,
I'm willing to commit at this 1 minute that it's the first quarter of 2025, give or take a quarter. So you can lock me in on those 6 months.
I know, right? It's crazy how those things work out. But I don't know when the market's going to turn. There's some positive signs that it might turn the second half of this year. But I think you had a historic run up of freight and activity. You had this surge of demand that evaporated overnight. But to meet that demand, there was a surge of new capacity that in the new carriers, that with new brokers. And whenever something shoots up that high that quick, it's going to fall fast, and it's going to be a deep, long cycle. And that's what we've experienced so far.
So when we're talking about the freight market, we're talking about the trucking companies, but obviously the freight brokers are glommed onto that same market. And we saw during COVID this unprecedented increase in logistics demand. So trucking companies added trucks, new trucking companies popped up. And of course, that's what we want. We needed it. And then as that demand went down, we needed some armies to leave the field. And that's very unfortunate for anybody's personal experience. A lot of times it's just people shedding trucks. They had 100, now they got 90. Somebody speculated, I don't know that anyone can prove this, that the trucking companies are staying around a little longer because they probably there was a lot of profits during the COVID era. You got to be getting that, that bundle's got to be getting a little smaller. But also we have more and more freight brokerages in the market who are helping keep brokers going. Now, there's probably a whole bunch of trucking companies listening going, oh, sure. But the reality is that most of those relationships are good ones. And those freight brokers are the sales team for a lot of carriers,
yeah. They are. It's your outsourced sales department. So we did see a huge influx of brokers. That doesn't add any capacity. I know people have told me that doesn't add capacity. I realize that. It doesn't add any capacity, but it depresses prices, I think, because we are a competitive bunch, freight brokers. And a lot of times we go to price to compete on. And I think that depresses prices a little bit more than they should be. So we're seeing a shakeout of brokers. We were at close to 32,000 in November of 2022. We're down under 26,000 now. And we're going to see that it's declining 10% year over year. And I think that trend's going to continue. And it needs to shake out. As you said, the armies need to leave the field. Armies need to leave the field to balance out the market. And it's a slow, painful process. It doesn't happen nearly as quickly as freight demand can surge. And that's just part of the process.
So the market is going to be down until it's not. That's my call. And
it's a good prognosis.
So you said 32,000. When was the peak? 32,000. What month and year was that?
November 2022.
So that was still COVID, about towards the end of COVID. And then right now we're at about 26,000.
About just under 27,000.
And if you follow Kevin on LinkedIn, you see all this research. He puts a lot of stuff up for free. So I've seen these, and I reference Kevin, I think, every third episode on my podcast because he puts a lot of very good information up on LinkedIn. So let's talk about those almost 27,000 freight brokers. I know you have broken them up into a few categories. Talk about those categories and who's doing what.
Yeah, so it was top 20. We'll talk about this later too, is consolidation. It's skewed the top 20 number, right? And those are brokers just doing over $1 billion in gross revenue. And everything is annual gross revenue. It's a good way to split the market down. Then you have large cap, which is about 100 million to $1 billion. Then you had mid cap, which is 50 to $100 million. Then you have growth cap, which is 10 million to 50 million. And then 1 to 10 million, you have what I call micro cap, right? And then you have everybody else, what I call lifestyle. And that's the remaining 25, 24 now, 23, 24,000 active brokerages out there that might have one or two people. Some of them might be full-time, some of them might be part-time. It just really depends.
Okay, so first one you said is large cap, and what is their revenue above?
Large cap is 100. Let's just dump all the large cap, $100 million or more.
100 million plus. Nicely done. And then the mid cap is, what'd you say, 50 to 100?
50 to 100 million.
50 to 100 about. And then growth is what?
10 to 50.
10 to 50. And then micro is anything under 10.
Yeah, let's say 1 to 10, or you can lump it all together, under 10 million.
And so when people are talking about freight tech stuff, and so people who call you, they aren't interested necessarily in all the smallest guys. They're interested in the biggest guys. I'm sure there's some people who still want to serve the lower part of the market, but most people are going to want to go where the money's at, which is the top companies. How many companies make up that large cap?
That large cap is about, let's just say 150.
150. So the top 150 freight brokerages. So those are companies that we would all recognize. That'd be the TQLs, the NFI, I think Ryder's in there now, C.H. Robinson.
Yeah, Ryder's definitely in there.
And
C.H. Robinson, Sage is in there. So some newer players as well. But yeah, all the
Molo,
people, Nolan Transportation Group, Molo's in there, of course. They're part of ArcBets now. So Molo's definitely in there. Low Smart's in there, right? Transfix was in there now with NFI. So they're certainly in there. Talk about M&A acquisitions right there.
So that's a mix of old and new. So that's the 150 million. Now talk about this mid cap. What are those guys?
Yeah, mid cap is 50 to 100 million, right? So it's those brokerages, with maybe 50 employees to 100 million or 100 employees that are usually getting to that $100 million plateau, right? They're going from 50 to 100. They're in growth mode. Sometimes that's painful because what got you to 50 millions, not necessarily going to get you to 100 million, right? And that goes with technology, that goes with people, that goes with customers, that goes with certainly processes. And a lot of the senior leaders to get to 100 million, delegation and automation are important factors. So it makes it difficult sometimes.
And what always mucks this up a little bit is some of those growth cap companies, the 10 to 50 or the mid caps, 50 to 100, could also have hundreds of trucks. They could be attached to it, or thousands of trucks. They could be attached to a very large trucking company. So it's not appropriate to say we're going to count out anybody below mid cap, because they might be attached to a very large company that owns trucks and might own warehouses, might have port locations. So there might be a whole lot of other things they're bringing to the party.
Oftentimes they do, right? Oftentimes that's not the exception, but the rule is that they are attached to more services than, say, domestic truckload or LTL freight.
Yep. So for all these companies, obviously we've seen this across all segments of the market. We're seeing the unit economics, they're constantly working on them. So we're buying more and more technologies. Now, the bigger guys can obviously afford the technology investments a lot easier than the smaller guys, but the smaller guys tend to be a little more nimble, maybe keep their costs low other ways. I think we're seeing a lot of companies use in outsourcing companies like Lean and Task Force and all the other companies that are out there helping with low-cost labor from other parts of the world. And all these technologies, we were talking about green screens before we record, they're using all sorts of technology to get faster, better, smarter, and they're going to lower their costs and they're going to be able to add more value. So in some ways, the unit economics are going to really improve for the large caps, and is it right to say also some of the mid caps and growth caps?
Oh, yeah. Yeah, definitely. If you're a growth cap, say you're doing about $25-30 million in gross revenue. When I started out, and that was the size of brokerage that I started out with, we just couldn't compete with everybody else because we didn't have the data, we didn't have the technology, we didn't have the speed. And that was just 10, 12 years ago. You'd have to build most of that out yourself. Now you can buy it off the shelf. And you mentioned green screens. You can have superior rating that is the same access as anybody else without having that volume in the business. So that makes you leaner, meaner, faster. TMS systems as well. A lot of this is now integrated with your customers, which creates stickiness, right? Which is something that all 3PLs and brokers and assets, it's all about relationships becoming stickier. If you can integrate with your customers and give them less friction, really, it is all the much better.
Yep. I think we're also seeing a lot of shippers after COVID, they realize can be a potential jam for us. This can jam up our supply chain. We saw that with the delays at Long Beach and LA and the lack of capacity. So we're seeing a lot of large shippers, a lot of supply chains investing in technology, but not just technology. They're investing in research like yours and information from companies like Sonar, Freightwaves, and DAT. They're starting to say, I'm spending $100 million a year on transportation and logistics. I can't just assume the market's going to get me the best price. I have to say, I made an investment in data and I'm going to make really good decisions. The only way you're going to do that is by investing in it.
It is. That's the only way you can do it. I think that's this is another trend that you have technology trend. I think corporate America will see more C-suite positions and more leadership roles open up for the supply chain. Back in the 70s and 80s, it was marketing people controlled the companies, and then it became the financial people.
Finance or sales, right? That was it.
Finance or sales. And now I think you're going to see a lot of operationally supply chain focused people, because one of the big pain points in 2021, technology was thrown in there too, right? We need to throw in technology to the leadership roles as well. But my good friend Seth Holm, who we work together at Freightwaves in the research department, he now runs a hedge fund. But we were talking the other day, and every earnings call, it was just like a bingo game of supply chain issues. And they lost the predictability of that supply chain budget, transportation budget, inventory budget. They want predictability. And I think technology offers them a way to have a predictable budget, because there's one thing that Wall Street investors and analysts don't like is unpredictability, especially in the supply chain.
Yes. So if you're looking for a TMS, please consider my friends at Revenova. Revenova is a cloud-based transportation management system built on the Salesforce platform, which means it has a built-in CRM and a higher level of security, reliability, and performance. Revenova is used by many of the top 3PLs, brokers, carriers, and shippers because it has all the features. It's multimodal, and it comes with lots of premium features like predictive pricing. If you want to learn more, please visit revenova.com. That's REVENOVA.com, or check the show notes for a link to my interview with Mike Horvath, one of the founders of Revenova. So I said it before on the podcast, but I'll say it again. I got a call from a recruiter. It was in the 90s, and I was working on China programs for Chrysler, Jeep. And I got a call, and some guy said, I'm a recruiter, and I really need some help. Need a good supply chain guy like you to come solve this and this. And I was like, supply chain? I was like, I kept writing it down. I'm like, of course, when a recruiter calls, you want to act like you know what you're talking about. I had no idea what he was talking about because he kept saying supply chain. And I was like, I'm an engineer. I'm launching cars in China. And then after he hung up, I called a recruiter friend. I said, what is supply chain? He goes, like what you do. I go, no, I don't. He goes, you got suppliers. I go, yeah, but they're not supply chain. They're suppliers. And anyway, I guess my point, my blathering story is, it is a brand new profession. It's always been there. It's been procurement. It's been transportation, it's been logistics, but supplier development, supplier quality, a million things that a lot of it comes from where I came from. Yep. And so it is getting to a point where those guys now have a seat at the table where they didn't always. And after COVID and during COVID, they got a lot more notice, whether they liked it or not. Anyway, Kev, I want to continue on. So the first point we talked about is the market volatility and how the market's doing overall. Second, we talked about the number of freight brokers. At its peak, we had 32,000. Now we're down to about a little under 27,000. And we have large cap, that's 100 million and above. There's 150 of those guys. We all know their names. There's the mid cap, 50 to 100 million. There's the growth cap, 10 to 50 million. And then the micro, which is 1 to 10 million. And then there's like 23,000 that are below that, which would be more lifestyle businesses. But I think there's a few interesting trends in there. One is this is the integrated model. It used to be freight brokers were freight brokers and carriers were carriers. Now we're seeing more and more carriers that bought freight brokerages and freight brokerages that bought some assets. And now also the warehousing and fulfillment companies might also have a freight brokerage attached. So it's not the lines are blurry for young Kevin when he's doing his research. While we're talking about it, I met Ed Burns from Burns Logistics at Manifest in February. And when he told me that what he does, I was, wow, okay, interesting. I never heard anyone talk about that. He was on my podcast recently. I know you also talked to him after I talked to him. He's doing something, and they've been around, but it's not a freight brokerage. It's a different model. And before we hit record, we were talking about how we expect in this freight brokerage space to see more innovation and more business models pop up. So first off, talk about what Ed Burns does, his model, and then also talk about how you see innovation coming into this space.
Yeah, so as I understand it, Burns Logistics is more of an agent for mid-sized fleets. Let's say 50 trucks, 100 trucks. They are an outsourced sales department, really, and they work
Mission
as
only.
agents. Yeah, they're not out chasing freight, right? They're more on the contract cycle, providing solutions to a handful of carriers that they work with intimately, right? As opposed to freight brokerages where you're going out and getting shipper customers and then you're fulfilling that capacity any way possible. You're always onboarding new carriers, whether they're owner operator or they are an enterprise fleet. Doesn't really matter. So it's a different take on that, on the brokerage model, brokerage/agent model. It's a different spin on it, and it works out really well for them. And I think it's a great idea, right? Because you limit your capacity, you go out and you represent them to the shippers who need that type of service, that contractual service, and you can really grow a business like that.
Yeah, so he's just a sales agency and they're commission only. So the carriers that they're working with are, by the way, a lot of carriers want a direct relationship with the shipper. So the name of the podcast I did with Ed, I'll put a link to it in the show notes, but it was just called Getting Good Shipper Freight, because when I get a call from carriers, they usually say to me, we just want good shipper freight, which means I don't want to work with a freight brokerage. And so my short answer is always, you should find better brokers to work with because there's some good ones out there, or you should spend some money on your own sales marketing. And that's both of those are not great answers. They just want the silver bullet, but I honestly think there's a lot of companies, but you got to be of a certain size to work with Ed and his team. But I love that they have a brand new model. I wouldn't be surprised to see a lot more innovation in our market, because that's been the last 10 or 15 years, just tons of companies innovating.
Yeah, and I missed one of there's a direct relationship with shippers, and that's something they offer as well, right? They facilitate that, they manage that. So it is more like you're an outsourced sales agency, more than a brokerage where you are more of a middleman.
Yep. And so many carriers get the sense that I'm doing the majority of the work and this guy's making all this money. And in a down market like we're in now, both sides think they're not getting enough. That's the challenge with that.
Exactly.
You don't get that with that company.
Yeah, you're going to pay brokers about what you'd pay salespeople. It's going to be no much more than that. And as Joe, money or sales cost money. You don't land clients for free.
So the next point I wanted to talk to you about is market share between brokered freight and non-brokered freight. So a lot of shippers in the past would say, I want to work directly with the carrier. I don't want any middlemen. But I think as freight brokerage has gotten, I will say, a cleaner, nicer, more professional reputation, we've seen our market share, and I'm not a freight broker. We see more freight brokers getting a larger percent. So please speak about that brokered versus non-brokered freight.
Yeah, and I think it goes hand in hand with technology and a couple other trends. But you see, back in, say, 2016, I have a chart, brushpastresearch.blog, free research there. But I have a chart detailing the percentage of every load that gets tendered, what percentage goes to a 3PL or a freight brokerage as opposed to an asset-based carrier. Traditionally, it's been around 15%. As of 2016, before 2016, it was probably when I started in 2012, it was probably about 10%. But you saw a big surge, of course, during the pandemic. But right now, it's 25 to 30% of every load. So one of every four loads that gets tendered out there is going to go to a 3PL. And I think a lot of that is due to technology, right? They can operate more efficiently. So that's a big thing on that. And number two is like any large asset player has a large brokerage. And they're using that brokerage for certainly for overfill, but it's its own separate business. Yeah, yeah. And they're in warehousing and they're just not a carrier anymore. They're becoming full service logistics companies, and that includes having maybe 5,000 trucks, $100 million brokerage, warehousing all over the U.S., and that's their business model. And international, right? We've seen some international players come in, and USA Truck, I think it was DSV, purchased. Yeah, I could be wrong about that, but I think it was DSV purchased USA Truck a few years ago. Did international freight forwarding that they wanted a footprint on the domestic truckload market, and you're seeing more and more of that.
Yeah. I will say also, if you're the middleman, and that's what it can be a little offensive title. It implies you're not adding value. But if you're in the middle of a transaction like a freight broker or a 3PL, if all you're doing is, let's say you're a shipper and capacity is tight and you call me, I get your truck, that's good enough. You don't need a whole bunch of research from me. All we did is one transaction. But as the market became more strategic over time, I think what we're seeing companies say, I want to work with this team that has the technologies that give us visibility. We want to see a process for customer support, customer success. And that's what a lot of brokers have provided now. I think they've become world class. And I think in the past it was, I'll get you a truck, I'll save you $50. Now I think it's, let us analyze your spend for the year and save you 5% and improve service. It's from going very transactional to very strategic.
And that is afforded, and a small correction on my part, is DB Schenker that bought USA Truck, not DSV. I didn't think I had that right,
Got
so
it.
I looked at it. But we were talking about it a while ago. If you have rating engines and market data like you find in Sonar, like you find in Green Screens, and other players out, Fairlanes is a new person on the block now as well, and your legacy providers out there, just on the rates, right? It gives you the ability to be able to digest that and analyze spend, where 10 years ago you had to rely on your own historical data, and if you were doing 30 or 40 million dollars, you didn't have much data to be able to do that. You didn't have the resources or the capabilities, but now you do. And those tools to feed the rates into, to analyze the actual analyzing part, you're seeing a lot of tech companies developing tools to be able to do that as well. It's awesome.
I will say I've made the prediction in the past that there would be less brokered freight as technology made it easier for shippers to work directly with carriers. And I think I was wrong about that. And I think where I was wrong was the brokers and the 3PLs have made big investments in the way they manage those accounts. And I think we're seeing the very best trucking companies also do the same. So it's not as if there is no one right answer in this space, but what we are seeing is the percentage of brokered freight is growing. Now it's up to 25%. You said it might have been 15% 10, 15 years ago. So it's interesting. And by the way, Kev, I've asked people dozens of times on my podcast and off my podcast, what percentage of freight goes through a broker? And everyone goes, I don't know, 20, 30%. They just have this vague, and that's what I quoted as, I don't know, 20, 30%. You're the first one who actually has research showing that.
Yeah, one of the things about collecting all this data on freight brokerages is that what's the revenue size? And now I can do my own estimates of the gross revenue of freight brokerages annually and real time. That's about $135 billion right now, which has grown. It's come down 15% over the last year or so, but rates have come down 30 or 40%. So you find that they're grabbing more shares still today. And yeah, it's good because we always talked about it after hours or in our seats in brokerage or at conferences, and no one had a really specified answer, but now I have the data to be able to publish that.
Yep. So the last thing I wanted to talk to you about was mergers and acquisitions. Very big trend in our business. So please talk about that for a sec, Kev.
Yeah, I think that the trend over the last few years has been consolidation, as well as others. You have NFI bought Transfix not too long ago, just a couple or 3 weeks.
Just the brokerage part.
Just the just the brokerage part about that. You see a lot of other tech players that had brokerages getting out of that. So I think probably market conditions not conducive to have both tech and brokerage.
Some people are making it work for sure. I think like the Load Smarts and maybe Uber didn't work for Convoy. And who's to say it doesn't work? It's just that people have different strategic initiatives. And
it's difficult to do. We can definitely say that. It's difficult to do.
Yeah. I think part of it is you're taking venture capital money. They assume you're in some sort of technology that can do that hockey stick growth. And I don't think every dollar is not created, revenue dollar is not created equal. You can't get VC money for freight brokerage. You can get it for freight tech.
You can. And we can say this too, I think, is it's difficult to build the freight tech tools or any tools whatsoever to begin with, right? And then I think a lot of people miss the equation of going out and then selling those tools and creating a market, because that's just as difficult as building something. Yeah, and that's why you build it and they will come is the greatest farce in the world. It is where a lot of people have died on that hill, right? Is that no matter how good your product is, you have to go out and sell it. And that is oftentimes harder than actually building it. So that's part of that equation too.
So I know I was completely wrong about how the percentage of brokered freight was going to go down over time. I'll make another prediction. Hopefully I'm not completely off like that one. But I think we'll have fewer freight brokerages in the future because the guys at the top are making the investments that just allow them to get faster, better, smarter. And I don't know that the guys at the bottom can compete. Maybe they always will be there because there's always going to be, if I'm a very small shipper and I say, you know what, I'm working with this onesie twosie company because I'm a onesie twosie shipper and I have a personal relationship. They live down the street from me or something. I think we'll always have some of that. But in terms of the volume, I think it's all going to go to the top part of the market.
Yeah, and I have a chart out on that too, that top 1,000, right? And you can see it heavily concentrated within that segment of the market. Even now, there's about 250 to 300,000 loads a day that are controlled by brokerages, and a lot of that is by the top 7% of that top 1,000. So you can see that concentration. There's only so many large shippers out there, so you'll see consolidation at the top. But as part of the small guys out there, or the smaller guys, I should say, they will always be there because if you look at the tail of shippers,
long tail,
right? So you're going to have a long tail of service providers always, right? Which is good for the industry. It's good for everybody, I think.
Yeah, it's very interesting because sometimes you find small shippers feel really comfortable with the guy that they say, I know the owner and I can call him up and I can text him. Others, my neighbor was making very few shipments a month. And I asked him, I said, who are you working with now? He was selling moving robotics. He goes, I just put my credit card in to C.H. Robinson and it was doing less than truckload moves. And he goes, I love them. They're great. And I was like, good for you. He only calls me when there's a problem.
You think about it, and I have it in the chart, is like I guess probably 70% of the top 1,000, right? They're doing 40 or 50 loads a day. And you can have a 30, 20, let's say $20 million business in annual gross revenue doing 40 or 50 loads a day. And you can get those mostly from small to mid-sized shippers, right? You don't have to go into the Coca-Colas.
It's a fantastic business.
Yeah, Coca-Colas or the Pepsis. Let the large cap players fight over that. There's a great freight out there that's moved by a company maybe 2 or 3 times a month.
Right. We also have companies like Emerge, and I don't think you can count them as a freight brokerage. Maybe they are freight brokerage. I don't know how you look at them, RFP.
Don't either.
But they give smaller carriers the opportunity to work with the Pepsis and the Coca-Colas. I'm sorry, I meant the Coca-Colas or Dr. Peppers. I didn't mean to say Pepsi in there. Now that they're the number 3 cola maker. Anyway, I'm going to summarize what we talked about. I'm talking to my friend Kevin Hill, and we're talking about 4 trends in freight brokerage. And this isn't a trend, but this is just for our conversation. It feels like the whole industry has grown up, become much more tech-centric, of course. We all know that. Feels like we got a better reputation in the overall market. I think the entire supply chain is being brought to the adults table from the kids table. And I think the recognition that freight brokers are adding value in this equation is very telling about how the world looks at this industry. So the 4 things we talked about, big trends, is one is the market volatility, and the market still down, hopefully coming back in the next 6 months. Next, we talked about the number of freight brokerages. The peak was 32,000 in November 2022, and right now we're just under 27,000. We've lost some freight brokers along with some carriers. And we talked about the different size freight brokerages. There's the large cap, 100 million above, mid cap, 50 to 100, growth cap, 10 to 50, and the micro, 1 million to 10 million. And then there's the 23,000 lifestyle businesses out there still making a good living, still doing well. And then we talked a little bit about this innovation that's happening in this space. We're going to see more of it. We've seen a lot of VC dollars. I don't know if it's rushing at the same rate it was, but there's still lots of innovators in this space looking and saying, how can I become the next category? We mentioned Ed Burns and what they're doing. I wouldn't be surprised to see a lot more companies coming along in non-traditional freight brokerage roles. Next, we talked about market share. So the brokered freight has grown to 25% of all shipping, which is crazy because it used to be 15% not so long ago. Then we talked about mergers and acquisition, how we just have the bigger guys are making investments to buy up. Sometimes it's cheaper to go buy sales rather than to grow your sales. And I think we're going to see fewer freight brokers in the future because of the guys at the top are making investments that give them real advantage in unit economics. Anyway, Kevin Hill, final thoughts. Put a big old bow on this one.
I think, it's, the last 10 years has taken the industry from maybe the dark ages or the shadows into mainstream. And I think innovations there, both on the technology side and as we were talking about Burns Logistics, different business models within being a logistics operator, provider. So I think going back to your article about freight brokerages and Wall Street and stock trading,
a long time ago.
we're going to
Stock
see
broker versus freight broker. Yeah,
exactly. It might not pan out perfectly like you panned out, but that innovation is there. And what you saw in the financial markets over the last 20 years or so, becoming more efficient and having different fintech businesses. I think that's what you're seeing in freight right now, because it's a marketplace much like the stock market, and there's a lot of tools out there that have not been built yet, and we will see them built, which will create different categories of logistics providers, I think.
Yep. And that, Kev, you're referring to an article that we were talking about earlier today, but it was basically an article I wrote many years ago, and it was just talking about how stockbrokers got displaced by the discount players. And I was wondering if that could happen in our space. Well, I'll look it up and I'll put it in the show notes. But anyway, I know we've made it to the big time when we have our own research company, Brush Pass Research, following up on all the stockbrokers and all the freight brokers. So, Kev, if somebody wants to work with you, what does that look like? So they reach out, and what's the next step? How's that work?
Yeah, you can go to www.brushpassresearch.com, or the free research is at brushpassresearch.com.
I'll put a link in the show notes.
Great. And you can email me at kevin@brushpassresearch.com or LinkedIn. That's always a great way to reach me, is LinkedIn, Kevin Hill. Certainly follow me, connect with me. I like connecting with people, and then you'll get, hopefully you'll get on your news feeds the research that I publish weekly.
So if they want to buy it, though, what's that process look like?
Oh, that process. You can buy it on the website, but usually just give me a call or shoot me a message. We'll set up a demo. We'll go through what it is and what you're looking to do, and figure out if there's a match there. And then you can purchase your annual subscription where you can go in and download the data anytime you'd like.
I love it. I love it. I know we made the big time because we've got our own research guy. Anyway, Kevin, I know it's the middle of summer, or beginning to be middle of summer, so we won't be going to any conferences for a minute. But what conferences will we next see you at?
Yes, I don't know in order because I don't have the dates, but I aim to go to Technovations, TIA, Technovations.
It's in Austin this year, you said?
I think it's somewhere in Florida, maybe
Okay.
Austin. So I have that, and BCS Broker Carrier Summit here in Fort Worth in October as well. And then I'd like to make it out to F3 this year in Chattanooga.
Very nice. Very nice. So again, I will put a link to your LinkedIn profile, a link to your website, a link to any of the research you want to give me. I'll put in the show notes, and so people can reach out and talk to you. Kevin, thank you so much for coming on the podcast. It is always a pleasure to talk to you.
Thank you, Joe. It's always a pleasure talking to you, the OG of the freight podcast world.
Thank you. Thank you. I don't know if it's true, but I appreciate it. Anyway, and thank all of you for listening to my podcast. Your support's very much appreciated. Until next time, onward and upward. You have been listening to the Logistics of Logistics podcast, where we engage with leaders in the logistics and supply chain community. If you like what you hear, please subscribe, hit the like button, and leave us a nice review on Apple or Spotify or wherever else you listen. Also, please check out our videos on YouTube and connect with us on LinkedIn. We're very big on LinkedIn. And you can also reach us on the logisticsoflogistics.com, our website.